Welcome to the Twist News. I'm Erika Grey.
And good evening. My name is Don Pravda, and welcome.
Today I'm going to talk about political correctness regarding Ukraine. Now, this is going to be a very shocking episode because I'm going to really highlight something here that's not going to be politically correct, Don, and that's the political correctness surrounding Ukraine.
I'm listening.
Okay. The political correctness. If you tune in to any media, you're going to hear certain catchphrases. If you listen to the politicians, whether they're in Europe, the United States, it's all the same. The brutal Russian invasion of Ukraine, Russian aggression. These are just a couple of the phrases. You have so much bombardment in the media that I talk to people and they sound like they're repeating the media. Putin, monster, Russian aggression, imperialism. And you know, if you're told something over and over, Don, you're going to believe it.
Of course. Absolutely.
No, if you're told something over and over and over again, and I think this is what the media is doing. The reality is, if you listen to Sergei Lavrov, who's very intelligent, Russia's foreign minister, you'll hear him provide detail after detail. And yet the United States calls this propaganda. So everybody in the media, or US media, is believing of this horrible Russian aggression. I want to show you something on Google. So if you listen to the media, the Western media, you hear that the Ukraine war is the most brutal war of history. There's none like it. And they just keep showing images after images to really relay this point. But if you type into a Google search, wars with the greatest destruction, look at what you see. You see that Ukraine is not the only war with the greatest destruction. Look at all of these images. Look at all of these photos. Now, Ukraine is in here, but Syrian civil war. Wait a minute, these are all. There's one of Syria, World War. But if you look at pictures of wars and you do a Google search, you're going to see that no matter what war you look at, they all look the same. Wouldn't you say, Don? Or what's your opinion?
Well, we just had two confrontations, 20-year wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. I'm trying to search for the benefit of this 20-year war. And we've had Vietnam, Korea. You could offer your opinion about Kosovo and other conflicts. But Vietnam War was a devastating war in this country, as was Korea. And it was considered a land war because if the at least billing was to us was that if Vietnam falls, all of Asia will become red, as it was said, or communist. That was the suggestion. In the entire world is chiming in against Russia because they think that they're the aggressor. But there's a certain point that we just have to remember. These countries have been together for centuries. It's not like they don't know each other. Russian is spoken in the Ukraine. There's plenty of Russians who know Ukrainian. There's Jewish people in Israel from the Ukraine and Russia. So where are we going with this? I think the conflict's been very prejudiced against Russia. And in fact, other nations are not agreeing with the basic American policy.
Right. Well, of course, China, India, and many other nations. And then anything that is spoken on a Russian broadcast, anything, is called propaganda. But yet there's no propaganda coming out of the United States. No, not at all. Wait a minute. How about all these reports for months and months that Putin is sick, Putin is dying,
Right.
People are going to rising up against Putin. I mean, this is just all fiction. And it's reported as news because there's a strategic purpose so that people can think that, who knows the strategic purpose, so that they can think that Russia is weak or Putin is weak for whatever reason. But the point is that the media now is highly manipulated. Al Jazeera did an excellent piece on the Twitter files and what was discovered. And we're just going to play a little clip of that, just in case you think we're blowing steam about U.S. propaganda. And by the way, I see the effects of it. I hear now the catchphrases, and you even hear it repeated by experts. But we're going to play a little clip. That is just shocking, how the CIA and FBI basically are manipulating Twitter with information, accounts. And let's not forget, Don, that YouTube even took down many channels. And the Russian networks, let's look at the Russian networks that were taken down as well. Because the minute the Russian operation in Ukraine began, now the media decided that all information out of Russia was propaganda, despite the fact that the West is putting out its propaganda. What's your thoughts?
Well, it's a complicated issue, I think you would agree, but for some reason, the entire universe seems to align with Ukraine when we could have easily, would you agree, stopped this war? Couldn't have been stopped before it began by the powers that be.
Oh, it could have been stopped
easily.
By just sitting at the table.
That's right.
Again, Sergei Lavrov cites the times that Ukraine went to sit, but then apparently backed out of certain agreements. All Russia was asking was that Ukraine be neutral. And now you have the U.S. sending billions, the EU sending billions of dollars of weaponry fighting this war. It is a proxy war. And then blaming all of the bombings on Russia. And some of those bombings are actually staged. They're staged in the media or by the Ukrainian media to look like Russia, when it was actually on the part of Ukraine that some of that destruction took place. So there's a lot of manipulation and propaganda in the media concerning this war.
Absolutely. I mean, we don't want, Erika, tragedies. We don't want people killed. We don't want people losing their apartment buildings or their homes or their businesses.
But they're losing it because the West is keeping this war going.
That's right.
Is fueling this war and has decided now it's going to fight till the end. And then what do? All of the deaths are blamed on Russia when they won't come to the table with an agreement that was not unreasonable to begin with.
And don't you have the impression this is going to be a very long war?
Oh, they're fighting to the nth with the economies of scale and the empires now in a race to be the leading empire, the most self-sufficient. Ukraine is 40 million citizens. In addition to that, Ukraine is agriculturally rich. So of course they're fighting, and we've talked about that, Don. We've talked about the gas deals from the United States, the money that was being made on the pipeline in Ukraine, and then the Nord Stream 2 was going to move out of Ukraine, and so there was protest against Nord Stream 2 for that reason. At the end of the day, it's all about money and deals and corruption and democracy and sovereignty, and those phrases are used as catchphrases when it's all really dealing with GDP growth and companies prospering and people prospering.
And whatever the real story is about labs in the Ukraine, certain things that I think will be divulged in the next months and year. I think we're going to see some real inside reporting, and we'll be working with them on this show.
Yes. And another annoyance as well is the fact that Ukraine is talked about as if there was no other conflict. And you have to be outraged that Ukraine is predominantly white. And when you've had black nations, nations of color with conflict and refugees, they weren't given red carpet treatment. Their people were not talked about like the Ukrainians are talked about, as if there's no other people that have suffered but Ukraine. No other nations that are suffering but the Ukrainians. And this is just outrageous, because right now there are so many nations that are suffering under brutal gangs. You know, what's happening in Haiti, what's happening in South American countries, what's happening
Mexico.
Yes,
Big one.
and there's so many other countries that are suffering, and just the Ukrainians seem to matter. It's just amazing that not only do you see the catchphrases being used in the media, but you also hear it being used by world leaders. And so you have to be looking at this with a double lens of what they say to appease the people and what is really going on, and how some of these geopolitical terms are being misused and abused, really, when it's about money and deals and prospering their empires. So Ukraine is a huge land grab. The eastern Ukraine is predominantly Russian.
Yeah.
And that's another issue. You don't poke the Russian bear, but you also don't poke the bear's cubs. And there were various moves that were not highly publicized that Zelensky had made in the Donbass region that was very frightening for the ethnic Russians. And Russia felt a need to protect its citizens, just as any nation would feel a need to protect their citizens in a country if there was a block of citizens that were as numerous as the Russians were in or are in the Donbass. So there's more involved here in this conflict. There's a lot more history, Russian history with the Ukraine, but also the fact of our pointing missiles on Russia's doorstep. Not wanting missiles on our doorstep, which is what happened at the Cuban Missile Crisis, but it's okay for us to point missiles on Russia's doorstep. And now Russia needs to accept Ukrainian sovereignty, but we don't accept Israeli sovereignty. Nobody accepts that, nor do they accept Russian sovereignty and what Russia does not want at its borders. So for all of this Russian imperialism talk, in all of Putin's 20 plus years in power, all you've ever seen is Georgia and Ukraine be the issues of conflict because of this very topic. Your comments on this, Don?
Well, do we want another Vietnam? Do we want another Afghani and Iraqi war? 20 years, 13 years. How many wars are we going to be part of in which the sides don't win? I don't see how the Ukraine could possibly so-called win this war. It does not seem winnable. It does not seem possible. And Russia has the experience. They have the men. I believe they have the military and the expertise. And they will hang on for years if they have to. And they have enough emotional support in that of the church, and they will continue for years. And apparently the West will mainly support the Ukrainians. But where is this going, Erika? What is the end?
Prospering U.S. LNG gas companies, right. Prospering the defense departments, prospering the defense companies. That's where this is going. That's exactly where this is going. There's talk of also rebuilding Ukraine and making Russia rebuild Ukraine, but also there's going to be those companies that are also going to prosper. So that's the point of keeping this going, but the U.S. isn't going to be able to keep it going because we're racking up deficit to keep this going and neglecting the needs of Americans, the homeless, as well as the mentally ill in America. There's no provision for, so that all this money can go to the Ukrainians and to Ukraine and basically pay for the deals that are keeping politicians in power from the high-powered corporate heads and other various wealthy individuals. That's what this is doing. And it's going to, unfortunately, keep going. And maybe not at some point when the U.S. dollar tanks, which we know is coming, we'll see if it'll then continue to send money and arms, because it's not going to be able to continue to send that. Anyway, that's it for tonight's show.
And shalom, shalom, shalom. And see you next time. And thank you.
Yes, and be sure to check out our Amazon store, subscribe to our channel, stay tuned to our broadcast, and be on your guard for what you're hearing, because there is a lot of propaganda now in the media.